Yeah, so welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. Here are the IARPC Career Community of Practice Leaders. So not all of them are here with us today, but these are the names of the people on the IARPC side that are helping to make these sorts of meetings happen. You can switch it to the next slide, Tony. And because this is a collaboration between IARPC and USAPECS, these are the names, myself included, on the USAPECS side that are working to make this happen. I should say I know less about IARPC than USAPECS, but if anyone on the call is interested in becoming involved in USAPECS, you can reach out to me. Just Google my name. And we usually receive we receive applications throughout the year and sort of decide from there who can sort of contribute in different ways. So anyways, with that, we'll move on probably to the intros of each of our panelists, or actually, sorry, we'll go through to the agenda. So Tony, switch over to that. Thanks. So very exciting today. We have 4 panelists at different stages of their career that have been involved in this sort of fellowship process, either as people who've received fellowships or reviewed fellowships, both graduate and postdoctoral. So these are very useful resources. I encourage anyone on the call to ask them questions as they come up. You can just drop them in the chat if you'd rather do it that way. We will have a moderated Q&A session, but if something sort of just pops up in your mind, you can just put it in the chat and we'll get to it at the end during the open discussion. So we have this scheduled till 3 p.m. Eastern. If we finish before then, that's all right too, but just know that we have plenty of time to pick the brains of these different panelists. So we have Kaitlin Harbeck from NASA, Lisa Rahm from NSF, Tasha Snow. Tasha's a research scientist at University of Maryland and at NASA Goddard. And then Alexia Kubas, who's a PhD student at Cornell. So in the next few slides, they'll give introductions and they can tell you all about how they got to where they are now. And then we'll move on to the Q&A. All right, next slide, Tony.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. So my name is Kaitlin Harbeck. I am a program executive within the Earth Action element in the NASA Earth Sciences Division at NASA headquarters here in Washington, D.C. So going back a handful of years, I got my Bachelor's of Science in Geography from Penn State back in 2009, and my Master's in Earth Science and Glaciology from Ohio State in 2011. Right after I graduated, I started pump the brakes a little bit there in the spirit of this conversation. I actually applied for the NASA Earth and Space Science Fellowship when I was in my first year at Ohio State, and I didn't get it. And I learned quite a bit, I think, about what I've learned quite a bit since about what makes a good proposal and what makes a less strong proposal. So I'm happy to share you my learning experiences about that today. After graduate school, I went to work at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, where I served as the data product manager for the ISAT-2 mission for almost 10 years. And then I moved to NASA headquarters, where I helped support the Cryospheric Sciences program alongside Torsten Marcus for almost 3 years. And just this summer, I accepted a new job as the program executive for Earth Action, which is more of the applied sciences side of the house within the Earth Sciences Division at NASA headquarters, but still very much involved in helping our program managers run panels, successfully select proposals, and helping early career folks like you all on the call here write the best proposals possible so they can get reviewed highly. So just a handful of pictures from my travels, Chile, Iceland, and then most recently this summer up in Cape Breton Island, enjoying my favorite food, lobster.
Great, this should be yours, Lisa.
Hey, thanks. And it's nice to see everyone. I started with a master's from Duke University, and I came up to Washington to work for a small company called the Joint Oceanographic Institutions. And at the time, they ran the ocean drill ship, the International Ocean Drill Ship. And I worked there for a couple years, and then I went to work for the U.S. National Science Foundation, and I've been there ever since. So I started out in their shipboard instrumentation development program. I ran a whole bunch of different kinds of facilities programs, including the National Accelerator Mass Spectrometer facility, NOSAMS facility, and just as a program officer, not running them, just managing the paperwork for them. I worked for the NSF budget office for a couple years. And the nice thing about a lot of government careers is that you can move around, you can do different things at the same institution. And I have done that. So even though I worked for the Division of Ocean Sciences most of my career, I have done a lot of different things at NSF. So now I started out in facilities, and then I got interested in education, and I run education programs now, geoscience education programs. So research experiences for undergraduates, the career program, Advance, which was for promoting women in science. The GK-12 is a program that's now gone. Centers for Ocean Science Education Excellence, also a program that's now no longer running. Postdoc fellowships for OCE. We had that for a while. We stopped it. We restarted it. I helped write the solicitation to restart it. And if we have a chance to talk about some of the things that are different about being a postdoc now from OCE and the Office of Polar Programs, they both run their programs the same way. So they're different also. The postdoc programs in OCE and Office of Polar Programs are different from the earth science and the atmospheric science postdocs. So I'm happy to talk about that if you have questions. And now we recently started a new division called RISE, Research, Innovation, Synergies, and Education. And I am working in that division now, although I still work with ocean sciences and I still work with polar programs. So that was it. Thanks. Oh, and these are some of my favorite logos from some of my favorite programs. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Tasha Snow. Yeah, my background is both in oceanography and glaciology. So I did a bachelor's at University of Washington in oceanography. I went into the Navy and served. And then I got my master's in marine science at University of South Florida, and recently a PhD in geography at University of Colorado Boulder. I Yeah, I've done a lot of work in Antarctica and Greenland, so that's where a lot of these pictures are from. My postdoc was at Colorado School of Mines, and during that work, I started getting into open science and cloud computing, running the Cloud Jupyter Hub for our communities to access the cloud for cloud computing. I during my master's and PhD, I did receive both the NSF and the NASA graduate fellowship, so I have familiarity with those. And then during my postdoc, I reviewed the NASA fellowships, so I have both ends of experience in that respect. So yeah, I'm excited to talk to you more about any questions you have on that.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexia Kubas. I am a third-year PhD candidate at Cornell University. I started at the University of Arizona studying astronomy, actually, and I graduated in 2022. And since then, I've been pursuing a PhD at Cornell. I am a planetary scientist, so specifically, I research paraglacial processes that happen on Earth, but also other planets like Mars and Ceres. And I conduct my research through geophysical investigations in the field, numerical modeling, and laboratory experiments. So I've been to the Arctic twice so far for field campaigns in Tuktoyaktuk, Northwest Territories, Canada, to study these really cool landforms called pingos, which you could see on the bottom on the right, and also me standing on a pingo with another pingo in the distance on the top right. Pingos are these really cool landforms made of permafrost and ice, and you need a lot of groundwater to form them, and they have really unique surface morphologies, so we think that they might also exist on other planets like Mars and Ceres, which is where my planetary science research comes in. I am also a NASA Finest Fellow, and I got that fellowship during my first year, and that is basically dictated the roadmap that I've been following ever since for my PhD.
All right, so now we're gonna get into our moderated question and answer part of the webinar. So Tony, can you switch it to the next slide? So maybe we should stop share actually at this point so we can see each other, and that way we're not just looking at a slide. Yeah, I'm just gonna open it up to our panelist. So we have just 3 questions just regarding proposal preparation, but feel free to expand on anything in any way you'd like. So my first question is just sort of how much time should you expect to prepare and write either a graduate or a postdoctoral fellowship?
I would defer to the recent awardees.
There you go.
I can start. I think that my experience might be a little unique because I wrote my finest proposal in my first year, and it was I wrote an NSF too that I didn't end up getting, but the NSF is just a 2-page proposal, whereas the finest is like a 7-page science proposal, and it's a lot more thorough and in-depth. And I was very anxious and scared to write that proposal. It was very daunting. While I wrote it, I was also basically putting together an idea for the research I wanted to do in my PhD, which felt like a really big task to me at the time. So I ended up first having a meeting with my advisor at AGU. So this is probably 2 months before the deadline to just bounce some ideas back and forth about what the contents of I wanted my proposal to be. And then it was the holidays, and then I gave myself the full month of January to write my drafts. I can't remember exactly how long it took me to write the first draft, but I know that I gave myself a full month, and then there were a lot of back and forth reviews. So I would say I probably spent about 2 months of like intellectual time thinking about what I wanted to write, doing some literature review to support that, and then also actually doing the writing.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. A month of writing was about what I put into it, but I had a lot of planning done before that. It's been a minute since I did it, but I think in general that's a nice amount of time for fellowship proposals.
And Tasha, you received both the NSF and the NASA one?
Yeah. And I did apply for the NSF postdoctoral one. I didn't get that, but yeah, all of those were pretty similar in terms of length of how much time I put into it.
Okay. So what was the hardest part of putting together the fellowship proposal?
For me, the hardest part of writing the proposal and also just writing in general is initially just getting words on paper. I feel like once you get started, it's a lot easier to get a draft together and then keep iterating upon that and making it better. But yeah, the hardest part for me was just getting all of my ideas onto the page just to start. And so I feel like just getting like, even if it's like stream of consciousness run-on sentences on a page, that can really help alleviate a lot of that initial anxiety.
I think for me, I mean, certainly the writing is the hardest part once you sit down to do it. But the one way that I've modeled a lot of the fellowships and scholarships and things that I've applied to throughout the years is finding people who have successfully gotten them and taking a look at what their proposals look like. So, and modeling my proposal off of that. So how you format the first page is really important, and getting, you know, your summary in the first page is really helpful. And like the layout, it can be very similar from one to the next in terms of like what your sections are, and that makes it very easy for the review panel to go in and say this thing that is required is here, this is here, and it just lays it out really nicely for the reviewers. And you might not know that if you haven't seen a successful proposal or two. So that's probably my biggest recommendation, is getting a hold of successful proposals ahead of time.
I would absolutely echo that, Tasha. So NSF and NASA obviously can't share submitted proposals with you all, but we publish the list of people who get them. So if you are perusing NSpires and you're looking for people who have received finest grants, for instance, and you see a name that you recognize, send them a note, congratulate them, but then ask them to share their proposal if they're willing, and to see how they did it. And then you can also ask them, if they're willing, to see their the panel evaluation summary that they received, to see what kind of feedback a successful proposal gets as well. So they're under no obligation to share these things, but it never hurts to ask.
I'd also recommend that you make sure that you get people to review it before you submit it. And I don't know who you got to help you review them, but that's really important, because you don't want to submit it without having someone else look at it.
At least for finest proposals. So these awards are grants, not fellowships. So the PI on the proposal is actually going to be your advisor, not you. You are going to be the future investigator, but your advisor is going to be the principal investigator, and ultimately the one who submits the proposal. So at the very, very least, they should be the ones reviewing your proposal and making sure that it stands the best chance to succeed. But Lisa's absolutely right. Having other folks on your committee, other folks in your advisory group take a look at it is wise as well.
I think another thing that I find really challenging, and it's kind of like how my brain works, and I've seen other people struggle with it as well, is making sure you hit all the requirements. I usually have a checklist at the end where I spend the last day at least, maybe more, going through the checklist and making sure putting my eyes on every single bullet item, because it's easy to miss those. And if you don't read the solicitation like 100% all the way through and then go back through, I'm often writing like little sentences to like make sure whatever requirement is clear on the last day, and really embellishing on those. So you want to highlight those, bold those if you need to, make sure they're pretty clear for your reviewers. But that can be a tough task. Like a lot of people just accidentally miss a line item. And it definitely, you have to know your personality, because I know some people who almost always do that based on their personality. And you want to have someone at least who can check you if that's not your strong suit, to do that. But going through a checklist is important.
Yeah, I mean, that applies to full-blown proposals too, right? That's a really good suggestion. So I just had it on here because at least Alexia and Tasha have both done a fair amount of graduate research that included fieldwork. So I was just wondering what the NASA and NSF what the requirement or policy was for fieldwork that's a part of these finest and NSF graduate fellowships and postdoc fellowships.
So for finest, like I said before, it's a grant. If you receive a finest award, it's a grant for $50,000 a year for 3 years. And yes, if you have a fieldwork component in your proposal, the $50,000 a year can go to cover that.
And for the NSF polar programs, postdocs, you cannot request field work for Antarctica. And a part of that is that it's a 2-year award. It takes 2 years to get to get yourself on the travel to Antarctica to deploy. And it's just not a process that is going to work with the 2-year schedule. For the Arctic, you can go to the field, but it has to be some, and actually for Antarctic too. If you're going along with somebody who's already got a trip planned, that's a little different, and you just have to talk to the program officers about it. So my advice is to talk to the program officers about what you want to do, but don't plan to fund your field work through the postdoc program.
Yep, I would echo that as well. Small supplemental field campaigns, field data collection that you are participating in that is already planned. Those are the sorts of things that can be covered with these small dollar amount grants, not a full-blown weeks-long campaign in Greenland or Antarctica.
I also just wanted to add that for the field work that I've done in the Arctic, I didn't have to directly ask for money for that in my finest because my group already had a larger grant, but I still devoted a little section in my finest proposal about the field work I was going to do and how it was going to bolster my NASA-funded research. And I think that if you're in a similar situation, it's definitely good to include that because I think it definitely made my proposal more competitive.
For my work, I didn't put any of the field work into my proposals, so that was all on the side. None of it came from that project, those projects.
All right, so we can move on to the review process of these, and I think what we'll find is a lot of this is sort of more general than just the finest and the NSF graduate and postdoc fellowships. But I was sort of interested to start this conversation topic with just what are specific things that make a good proposal stand out and a bad proposal stand out. So like specific things that we should really think about when we put these fellowships in.
I can start out with some advice in that if you're aiming at reviewers, you want your reviewers to get excited about your project. And they are reviewing a lot of proposals usually. So you want to explain in the very first paragraph what you're doing and why it's important. So you're telling a story with a proposal. It's not like a paper in an academic journal. It's a persuasive document. So remember that and be sure to catch your audience early before they lose their focus and move on to the next proposal they have to review.
Yeah, tagging onto that, Lisa, I'd say your proposal needs to be detailed enough where you're clearly outlining a coherent plan to set up your hypothesis and answer some questions, but it also should be broad enough where a scientist from a different community can read your proposal, get excited about it, and understand the basis of the science that you're trying to accomplish in the proposal. When we have our review panels and we assign a sea ice proposal to be reviewed by a glaciologist, they often freak out a little bit. They're like, oh, but this isn't my subject matter. I'm not a subject matter expert in Arctic sea ice processes. And I say, perfect. This person's proposal should convince you that their science is awesome enough to get anybody excited across the scientific spectrum. Something else I've found over the past few years that make a proposal stand out in a good way and in a bad way, I guess, with panelists is ensuring that you have a contingency plan written out in your proposal if things don't go the way that you expected. Panelists love seeing this because it shows that you've thought about your process from things working out completely to things not going as planned and what you're going to do about it in the event that things don't go as planned. So that's definitely something to consider writing about in your scientific section. And Tasha mentioned this as well. just evidence that you've read the solicitation and have followed the instructions and have included all of the sections that you're required to include is huge. In Finest, there's a mentorship section that some people omit, which makes your proposal non-compliant and is returned without review. This upcoming year, Finest is going to be dual anonymous peer review. So if you're planning on submitting a Finest proposal, and those are due at the beginning of February, be sure you read that solicitation very, very carefully to make sure you're writing it in a way that doesn't necessarily give away your identity. But there's plenty more information out there about dual anonymous peer review. Don't need to go into that today. Just an example of being sure to really read the solicitation carefully.
Another suggestion I would have is that when you're writing your proposal, to make sure, the advice that I received, and I think it worked really well, was to make your proposal ambitious but doable within the time limit. And that's really important, because if your reviewers do not believe that you can conduct the research that you plan in the amount of time that you have, then they won't support it no matter how good the proposal is. Another is to make sure that you have the support that you need to be able to conduct that proposal. So the people who have, the research background and expertise to support you need to be, baked into your proposal. Reading it, editing, having people edit it is super important, because I've definitely read some proposals that look like there hasn't been a review or anyone to edit it. And that really needs to at least come from the PI, the advisor on the proposal. But yeah, a lot of participation from the advisor is really helpful, or should be happening, to make sure that proposal comes out looking well. It reflects on the advisor just as much as the student or graduate student, to have that either there or not. Yeah, I'll think a little bit more on some others.
These are all really helpful. So what is the going selection rate for these fellowships? From NSF or NASA, and we're all interested in the cryosphere here. So like what is the selection rate for those that are cryosphere focused as well?
Lisa, do you want to go first? I'm digging up one statistic that I want to make sure.
Yeah, sure. We don't release those statistics, but in general, and it varies so much year to year. Depends on how many proposals get submitted. In general, we get maybe 40 to 60 proposals for the postdocs, and in the programs for oceans and for polar. And depending on the funding that year, we fund, usually it's somewhere between 15 to 30% of them, but it's so variable. I can't offer a prediction. So
That's fine. I just, as a general sort of rule for anyone who's interested, I think it's helpful to know what they're up against.
So similarly to NSF, NASA graduate and postgraduate awards are incredibly competitive. Finest has a selection rate anywhere between 10 and 15%. And Earth Sciences, our individual disciplinary selection numbers sort of are, I guess, a function of how many proposals we get that factor into our division. So last year for Finest, I believe the cryospheric sciences element received 27 or 28 proposals, and we were able to select 3. The early career investigator program, we usually receive anywhere between 10 and 15 proposals. We can usually only select 1 or 2. Finest really is a crapshoot. It's really terrible that we can't support more students under this program. And a lot of program managers are able to fund Finest outside of their direct programmatic budgets, outside of NASA's early career program budgets, but not every program is able to do that. Cryosphere, some years we were able to do that, other years we weren't.
Yeah, it's good to hear at least that that NSF and NASA are doing everything they can to help out to fund the strongest proposals. I think this was mentioned earlier, but what is the duration? So we know the postdoc, right? The postdoc fellowship's 2 years, but what is the duration of the graduate fellowships?
Finest awards are 3-year awards, and the early career investigator awards are also 3 years. Yeah, finest is $50K a year, and the early career investigator program, which is for people at least 5 years out of their PhD, is $150,000 per year.
Are you asking about the NSF GRFP? Is that graduate
Yeah,
research?
yeah.
Yeah, those are awards that provide 3 years of funding for the graduate student and their associated institutional cost. But they can use them over 5 years. So if you want to skip a year, you only get 3 years of funding for your PhD or master's. But if you wanted to skip a year and do 2 years and then skip a year and then fund your 3rd year with that money, that's fine too.
I guess
So
actually, sorry, Peter. And then there's, there's another, so there's Finest and the Early Career Investigator Award that are grants run out of headquarters. But then there's the NASA Postdoctoral Fellowship Program. And I'm unfortunately not super familiar with that one. Is that something that's run at the office of OSTEM and then through the centers? So yeah, sorry about that. But I encourage people to look into that one. That one is even more selective than the other grant proposals that we have, unfortunately.
I see. So what is required as far as progress reporting goes with these?
So every year, this is the same across all NASA grants. You're required to send a short report to the program manager in charge of facilitating or administering your award, letting them know what your year one goals were, what you did in terms of meeting those goals, whether it was scientific results that were published in a paper, at a conference, meetings you went to, and what your plans are for the next year. And we require these reports to be on hand before we disperse your next year's funding allocation. So there are some PIs and some FIs really outdo themselves in writing these annual reports, but really program managers are just interested in the progress that you're making on the work that you proposed. Yeah, they're quite simple, and I feel bad when I see people get wrapped around the axle trying to make sure that they're capturing every little minute detail of the work that they did over the past year. So also, like Tasha said, look at successful proposals, look at other progress reports that your advisor might have written to grants that they have either at NSF or NASA too. Those would be helpful.
And NSF has a similar process. It's an annual report. You submit it through research.gov. And we have annual reports as well as a final report. Some of our postdocs can do a no-cost extension. So sometimes it's 2 reports, sometimes it's 3 or more.
Yep, NASA also offers no-cost extensions for awards that that might be finishing up, but you need a little bit more time to finish the proposed work. And usually 1 or maybe even 2 no-cost extensions are offered for awards to let you wrap up the work without officially closing out the project.
Yeah, be sure if you do, if you are have one of the postdoc awards or any NSF award, if you need extra time, be sure to ask for a no-cost extension, especially, well, you can only get one if you have money left in the award. Don't let the money go to waste, basically, because otherwise, if you close the award and you haven't spent all the money, it goes back to Treasury. It doesn't come to us. So
yep, same with NASA,
make
same
sure
with NASA.
you use it.
Yeah, you wrote a proposal, you wrote a budget, you said you needed it, use it.
Sorry, I love that. So the last sort of scripted question, I think, is probably, in my opinion, the most interesting, and I just would like to give this amount of time that it deserves. So, do graduate and postdoc fellowships in the panelist experience, do they open up more opportunities for funding, or do they really sort of set you on a track towards sort of a more successful funding not resume, but yeah, how do these things sort of put you on the right track with your career?
So NASA is really, with the dual anonymous peer review, is really trying to get away from using past performance as a metric, even if it's not an official metric. Trying to get away from using that in panelist eyes and in program managers' eyes as a plus in terms of getting future proposals funded. We want new people to be coming into these programs all the time, and if we continue to fund the same people over and over and over again, that's not very equitable. So what I would say is that writing a successful proposal once does put you on a track to write more successful proposals in the future, because you know what you're doing and you've done it once before and you can do it again. However, if you've written an unsuccessful proposal and you really take the panelists' comments to heart, maybe you set up a meeting with the program manager in that particular focus area once you get your evaluation, and you say, hey, I really want to talk to you about this. What can I do to make my next proposal better? And they'll talk to you for 20 minutes, a half hour, and just reach out to these program managers. They're there to help. And so reaching out to program managers once you get your evaluation, whether it's for a successful proposal or one that was declined, that I think is the thing that really puts proposal writers on the better path to success.
I agree with that. It's important to talk to the program officers after you do your homework, make sure
Yes.
that you've looked at all the reviewer comments very carefully, and you've thought about it, and you have some ideas about what you might do, and you can go into a meeting like that saying, I'm thinking about changing it in this way, and will that address the reviewer's concerns?
One thing I didn't, and we can sort of come back to this for Alexia and Tasha, but one thing I didn't realize that I did not put down here was, how many times can a person apply to one of these fellowships? Is there a limit for how many times you can apply for the same fellowship?
So with Finest and with the early career invest, I mean, for Finest, you have to be enrolled at a 4-year institution as a grad student. And for the early career investigator award, there's a years past terminal degree limitation there. So that sort of limits the amount of times that you can propose to those two NASA solicitations. If you're a 4th-year PhD student and you're about to wrap up your schooling, I probably would recommend not applying for Finest because you won't need all the funds anyway. So they're sort of time limited in that they're for the amount of time that you're in school, or limited by the amount of years you are past your PhD for that early career investigator program.
For NSF graduate research fellowships, if you have graduated from undergraduate, you can apply as many times as you want before you start graduate school. And then once you are in graduate school, I believe the current rules are that you can apply once. And I don't know if that has changed for this year. So I'm sorry, I'm no longer working with that program this year, but they change. It could be either your first year of graduate school or your second year of graduate school, but I think you can only apply once. And then for postdocs, you can only apply if you have not had a position that requires a PhD for more than, let's see, you can only apply if you have been in that position that requires a PhD for less than 2 years. So you have 2 years after you get your PhD to apply, basically.
definitely another instance where, yeah, reading the solicitation is really important, or just reaching out to the program officer in charge of the call if you're not sure.
Yeah. So I guess I'm curious, and Tasha, I see you unmuted. I was really curious to hear your perspective since you have received these fellowships and now are writing proposals. You're a research scientist, so all the time, because I know how that goes. How has that sort of experience from graduate school helped you now?
Yeah, I think one of the best things you can do is to write proposals as early on as possible. I was doing it pretty early in my undergrad career, and that helped me a lot to do well in my graduate career and getting them. So even if you aren't successful, the practice in putting it together and getting your thoughts together, you'll probably be able to use a text. I used my my NASA, it was the NESSF at the time. Right. I'm losing track of all the acronyms for them. But I use that as my comprehensive like exam proposal for my PhD. So you can often use the text again. You'll use it for writing papers. But the practice of doing it made me more successful. Also outside of NASA and having that success looks really good for your next thing. Any successes that you have look really good on your resume. And there are ways that you can set yourself up for that, both for NASA and NSF, by doing outreach and things like that. Success and making yourself well-rounded can make you be more competitive for your next proposal. So I highly recommend thinking about that ahead of time. It's not just the science that you're proposing, especially for the NSF proposal. They care about you as a human and whether they think you'll be like a good contributor to the community. So there's a lot to think about in that respect. But yeah, I mean, each proposal that I've done, the next one's gotten a lot easier. And to go along with kind of resubmitting from a reviewer's perspective, it is great to resubmit, especially like any proposal, but like if you're resubmitting, say like an OPP postdoctoral, it's great to resubmit. I think you have a slightly, I mean, maybe Lisa can chime in on this, but I think you have a slightly better chance of doing it as a resubmit, as long as you address all of the questions and issues that the panel has. Because there have been panels that I've sat on where people have resubmitted a proposal and they haven't addressed things. And it is not uncommon to have a repeat reviewer who says, we asked them to do this thing and they didn't do it. And you're just automatically not going to really get very far with that proposal if you don't make those changes. But if you do make those changes, they have to come up with some pretty good reasons why you aren't going to get that proposal if it's really strong, since it's a repeat. So definitely recommend doing that and being very careful to address the reviewers' issues.
I also just want to lastly add that I think that writing a proposal in your very first year of grad school can be really beneficial to just set you up for the rest of your PhD, especially if the onus is kind of on you to put together the papers you're going to write and put together like the overarching science questions that you want to ask. Because I feel like doing that my first year really helped me just feel confident that I can do the research and that I had a timeline in place. And then it was easier for me to get the ball rolling and to talk about my plans more confidently in like oral exams and things like that.
All right. So that's it for any scripted questions. We can just open up the floor. We have a few minutes left. If anyone has some burning questions, you can ask them in the chat, or you can ask them, you can just unmute yourself and ask them directly. Also, our panelists, if you have anything else that you'd like to say that you feel like you didn't get the opportunity to say, you can unmute and go for it.
I guess super quick, I have a plug. So our early career research program program manager, Yaitza Luna Cruz, and her deputy are going to be having a town hall at AGU next week if you're going to be here. It's Thursday the 12th from 6 p.m. to 7. And this is going to be followed by a meet and greet, a networking meet and greet with a handful of NASA program managers who will be there to answer any questions that you might have about other NASA programs, what they're doing to support early career researchers outside of the specific early career research program. So yeah, I'm happy to drop the information for that in the chat.
Yeah, please do.
I'll follow that with NSF. It's going to have a booth at AGU, and please come by. Most of the program officers will be there since it's in DC. So please come by and introduce yourself to your program officer. Thanks.
We're not, program officers aren't scary. I think there's a lot of, I don't know, stigma out there about being worried about talking to program managers because they hold the purse strings. And something that Torsten says all the time, and I try to echo it, is please reach out. We are literally here to support you, the community. That's it. So yeah, don't be afraid to reach out if you have questions, concerns, anything like that.
I think though, one of the things that I did early on, and then when I was prepping for the NASA was to reach out to a program manager and say, hey, what do you think about this idea? And I think that that's really useful both in graduate fellowships and proposals later in the future. So yeah, definitely reaching out and getting they have a good feel for the landscape and what the reviewers are excited about right now and what proposals are already out there and what's funded. And so they're a really good resource and very accessible.
Cynthia, I saw you unmute. You can go and ask your question now.
Hi, yes, thank you. Thank you everyone for sharing. Really, really good insight. I'm currently looking at applying for the Polar OPP, and I was reviewing the application or the solicitation, and I was a little confused about the budget. In looking at, in particularly the fringe benefits and any indirect costs that I need to work into my budget.
You don't add those. Just the budget should actually be pre-populated when you start to go into the system. So it'll have your stipend and the $15,000 a year allowance, and that's all you do. You can put details in the budget description if you want about what you would plan to do with that, with the 15,000 that you get. But if you are recommended for an award, we have a new process. It's called a pre-award transfer. So that if you're recommended for an award, it gets transferred to the institution where you're going. They add their overhead onto it. And it's at that point that the fringe and the indirect gets added on, and they'll do that for you. It's not, you don't have to worry about it. And then you get health care through, you get all the benefits through the institution. And the other good thing about having the institution handle the award like that is that if the government shuts down, you still get paid. So if a lot of our old system, it's a direct award to the individual. And if so basically every month NSF was issuing a paycheck to you, and somebody at NSF had to do that. And if we're shut down, there's nobody there to give you your paychecks. So it's a much better to, considering the fact that we haven't had a budget now for years and years in time. This is much better system, and you get your health care and you get your benefits, and they know you're coming, and they're excited about seeing you on campus. So don't worry about the budget.
Thank you for that. I do have a second question, I'm sorry. When we reach out to program officers, would you recommend we send our project overview or like our summary?
Usually, yes. Email a one-page summary.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep, I think that, yep, I agree with that. Obviously, they won't be able to tell you, wow, this is awesome, this is totally going to get funded, or oof, no, this is terrible. Definitely don't do that. It won't get selected. But they'll be able to say, ooh, you know, suss this idea out a little bit more. What is the question that you're really trying to answer by collecting these data? Things like that. So, yep, send program officers one-pagers all the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And ask the question, does this fit in your program? Because we have boundaries on what we are supposed to be funding. And your ideas may be outside of that. And you need to know that upfront.
Yeah, for NASA, for Finest Awards, you can pretty much write a proposal across any area in Earth Sciences, and it'll get binned in a particular focus area. But when you are actually writing proposals as an academic or a research professional, once you're done with graduate school, it'll be really important to make sure that you're writing a proposal that fits in the focus area and the solicitation with which you're planning to submit that proposal. If it's irrelevant to the call or irrelevant to the program, you run the risk of having the proposal returned without a review.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions? I was told to submit a 2-pager recently, not a 1-pager. I know, right?
That's interesting too, because yeah, and Finest proposals, I'm not sure about the NSF graduate proposals, but they're only 5 pages long.
Right. No, this was in relation to a full proposal.
Oh yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I just was trying to be funny there.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. But no, the more details you can provide program officers about the work that you're trying to squeeze money out of them for, the better.
Although they have limited amount of time. That's why the 1-pager is what we recommend, because you know, 50 people submit a 1-pager and we're doing a lot of reading and writing and advising.
Yeah, right. Is there anything left? Let's see, Ryan just said thank you. Well, I'll say thank you for everyone who joined. This was nice. I feel like I learned just as much as anyone else. So
Actually, I have one quick question for Tasha, because I know she's. So what have you learned the most about writing proposals serving on a panel? Having now served on a panel or two.
Yeah, I mean, I loved sitting on panels. Seeing how people make decisions. I think this is something my postdoc advisor told me at one point, that, you know, getting a proposal funded is like a lot of it's a lottery. It depends on the reviewers. And so sitting on a review panel and seeing how that comes to fruition, like, there are things that I care about that, I'm like, I care about a lot about, like, the dual anonymous peer review and making things more equitable. And you could definitely see when there's biases in reviewers, and just seeing how that plays out is really cool and interesting. And it's useful for writing a proposal, and also like how you take the reviews. Because yeah, it's a lot different than you expect. Seeing the like personalities and how people like work together to make a decision, like who your primary reviewer is, really matters a lot, whether they like your work and advocate for it, and you don't really get a choice in who that person is. And so I think those dynamics are really cool.
Cool, thanks, Tasha. Sorry, Peter, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's fine. Well, we're up on time, but thanks again, everyone. This was really interesting. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you guys for organizing.
Thank you for organizing.
Yeah, thanks for organizing.